What's going on, guys, and welcome into this edition of b-schaeff Daily. Brenden Schaeffer here with you, September 29th, 2024. It is the final day of the MLB season, the regular season, which means the final day of the Cardinals season. But we're not talking at all about anything happening on the field because, well, the time has passed for any of that to actually matter at all for the Cardinals. Of course, this will be their second consecutive non-playoff season. They do secure a winning season rather than a losing one, so there is that. But no, we're focusing on this channel now and on the podcast moving forward on everything that is ahead for the Cardinals, which includes, we figure, a press conference on Monday at a time that, as of this recording, has not yet been determined, but sometime Monday morning or afternoon, in which the Cardinals are going to announce or spell out matters pertaining to their plans moving forward. And how specific they're going to get in that press conference remains to be seen. How much clarity we get about Chaim Bloom and his role. Obviously, been widely reported that he's going to be elevated into a full-time role in the front office and will be charged with hiring a new director of player development as Gary LaRocque retires at the end of the season. So a lot of moving parts there. If you looked at the reporting from Katie Wu of The Athletic, she stated that Ollie Marmol is expected to be back, which doesn't surprise me at all. It might surprise some of you guys listening, but I've tried to kind of lay that out of, look, if you think about it, the Cardinals are, it seems the tea leaves are suggesting not going to be raising payroll, and in fact, they might be slashing it, which is one of the big topics we're going to focus on here today. Sonny Gray, a new report out from Bob Nightengale pertaining to the Cardinals pitcher that we're going to spend some time talking about today. But if that's the case, and the Cardinals ownership is looking to decline that payroll, drop it a little bit, rather than invest in trying to go for it in 2025 with the top priority being the Major League Club, the top priority is not going to be the Major League Club. It's going to be a lot of the other things that I think we'll hear about on Monday. But with that being said, it doesn't necessarily make sense to change managers, right? Because the whatever manager that they would bring in 2025 would be over a team that is expected to win 75 games, 78 games, whatever it ends up being, depending on how many trades are made and how low the payroll goes and who's brought back and who's not. All those things are going to remain to be seen. But if you are not prioritizing the season of 2025 at the Major League level, then it doesn't really make sense to hire a replacement manager for a manager that I think internally the Cardinals are still high on. I still think that they believe Ollie Marmol can be the person to lead them into the future. However, it is going to come to a point where John Mozeliak's not around anymore, and the person that replaces him, again, that could be Chaim Bloom. We could find that out Monday, but we don't really have clarity yet on exactly what is going to happen with the role and how the responsibilities overall are going to be divided for this final year and then beyond that. So a lot of questions, but it doesn't surprise me that the Cardinals wouldn't be changing managers because, A, I don't think that they think Ollie is responsible for the struggles that have happened at the Major League level the last couple of years, and they are probably going to spell that out in the way that they talk about minor league infrastructure and some of the things that I think they're going to have to make strides in player development wise. So financially, I mean, it's honestly a business decision, if nothing else. You're not prioritizing getting every single win out of 2025 as the top priority. So why pay a second manager? Because you'd be paying Ollie Marmol. His new contract extension hasn't even kicked in yet. It's 2025 and 2026, the extension that he signed before this season. So I just don't see a world in which Ollie Marmol's not back, honestly. Be shocked by his firing at this point. So that's going to happen. And then the coaching staff as well, it seems, will be brought back in large part. We'll see exactly what that looks like, but that's according to Katie Wu's report from earlier in the week. Talked about it a little bit with Josh Jacobs on the podcast Philosophical Differences, which is out on the Brenden Schaeffer St. Louis Cardinals writer YouTube channel and on the b-schaeff Daily Spotify feed if you missed that from Saturday. But yeah, I mean, along the lines of possibly not prioritizing putting your best foot forward in 2025, which means like at the expense of development, because I feel like that's what it's been for certainly this year, rather than, hey, well, maybe a Michael McGreevy could step into a role. Maybe we could give a full season to Zach Thompson, Liberatore, some of those guys. Look, and some of those guys like Thompson throughout the season didn't have a good one, so that would have probably gone the other way. But I think the notion is, well, you would have learned about what you had in him. You could have learned about what you had in some of these guys. This 1 year removed from 2024 feels like an even better opportunity to do that because McGreevy did make some strides this year in AAA that we saw manifested a little bit at the big league level. Gordon Graceffo, it's another guy that you probably want to get a look at and see what he could become or could turn into. A lot of young players on the offensive side. Are they going to take steps forward, or are you going to make some trades to try and mix that group up? Probably not trades that involves taking on additional payroll, but could you shake up the deck, so to speak, shuffle it to find if you can get a better mix in there to be more productive offensively in 2025? They're going to try to do that. They're not going to do it in a way that means they spend a bunch of money, in my estimation. And so when I say it's not the top priority to win in 2025, it doesn't mean they're not going to go out there and try to win with the players that they have, but there are going to be other things that are put in front of that. Like, hey, maybe we don't go out and sign multiple veteran 30-something starting pitchers because we're worried about the bottom falling out. No, there could be a scenario where the bottom does fall out of that team in 2025 because the Cardinals, I think, are going to lean in the other direction where they prioritize younger players that aren't proven and may not have the stuff to perform at the big league level over the course of time. But the Cardinals are, I think, prepared to find out about some of those guys in that respect in 2025, and that could mean a wide range of outcomes for what the season could bring. It could mean being okay with another 90-loss season. It could mean being okay with worse than that. It could mean you invest in some of these younger players that finally they get their opportunity, and turns out they're better than you thought they were. They're better than you figured they were when you kind of thought, he's a quad A guy. He's not really ever going to be a big league starter. Well, if you force yourself to give that kind of player 20 starts next year, maybe that player proves you wrong. I mean, there is a world in which that happens, and the Cardinals can end up being competitive next year. But it's not going to be the first and foremost goal, and it's going to be a lot more difficult for it to come to fruition if some of the highly paid veterans that are on the team decide they don't want to be anymore. And we're really circling three names: Wilson Contreras, Nolan Arenado, and the final piece of that puzzle, and the one we're going to focus on today the most, is Sonny Gray. Because of a report from Bob Nightengale of USA Today that I think it either came out Sunday morning, or at least that's the first time I saw anything of it, where he says this. I'll just read it to you from his article in USA Today. The St. Louis Cardinals, who will announce a series of personnel moves on Monday with Chaim Bloom taking on a greater role, plan to shop veteran starter Sonny Gray while reducing payroll. And then he adds, Gray, who signed a 3-year, $75 million contract last winter, has a full no-trade clause with the Cincinnati Reds expected to be among the teams aggressively pursuing him, which is very interesting. Bob also added that the Reds are going to be aggressively pursuing Skip Schumacher, who will not be back as Marlins manager. So that's probably the one aspect of it for Cardinals fans who wanted to see a managerial change. Their argument's going to be, okay, understand the business side of it. If you're reducing payroll, and that's not going to please a lot of Cardinals fans, but it is what's coming. But even if that was the case, the chance to maybe have the manager that you believe is the best fit for the long haul, and that guy so happens to be available this offseason in Skip Schumacher, does it bother Cardinals fans that the Cardinals wouldn't be willing to make that swap? I understand, obviously, Schumacher's connection with the Cardinals. And, Schumacher and Ollie Marmol are also extremely tight, really close friends. So that there's that aspect of it. But I just don't see the Cardinals moving on from Ollie. So tell me in the comments that that's dumb. Tell me in the comments that you don't like it. I'm just passing along the information as I see it. I'm siphoning through the way that I see this playing out and sharing it. I do believe that it's a fine decision. I absolutely understand why the Cardinals would look to retain Ollie Marmol. And I heard on 101 ESPN earlier this week that they had spoken with Ollie, and Ollie basically had said he's really excited about the plan that's been laid out for 2025, and he's eager to get after it. And I actually believe that. We don't know the full scope of the plan, but I could see a world in which Ollie has basically, until you're told by the organization, hey, man, you're good, you're safe, you're not, we gave you that contract for a reason. And even when you've been told that, and you see the losses piling up, it might creep into the back of your mind like, man, I might be managing for my job until you get those assurances about your future. If I'm Ollie Marmol going into a season where there isn't the pressure external pressure anyway, to where it's expected that you make the playoffs, that is, I think, going to allow for him to have a little bit more freedom, not to make decisions differently necessarily, because I think he wants to manage to win every game anyway, but there is going to be that assurance of, hey, you're going to be a part of this for the future as well, which allows us here to have a little more maneuverability with making sure we are prioritizing the growth and development of these players as we prioritize what happens in the win-loss record and in the standings. And for a manager to be able to kind of blend those things without sort of the threat of, hey, you're not going to have your job hanging over you, which is not to say that Ollie's just going to indefinitely get to be the manager if the Cardinals continue to have losing seasons. But I do think I could see a world in which it would be exciting as the manager of a team who all right, the last 2 years haven't gone as well, and there was this big-time pressure, and the way that it was framed to the fan base was, hey, you've got to make the playoffs or there's going to be hell to pay, and we all know that we're all going to be under the microscope. Yes, the narrative is about to shift, and it's going to happen in a way that Cardinals fans, I think, are going to be pretty irritated by, because there's not going to be the heads that roll as a result of this failure, this 2-year failure of the Cardinals missing the postseason. However, if I'm looking at it from the perspective of the people that are involved in the organization, if I'm Ollie Marmol, I could absolutely see being rejuvenated by the opportunity to go, okay, we've kind of seen under the hood of this organization, and we know there are things that need to change that I, as Ollie Marmol, don't have influence over. I can't make ownership invest in additional minor league coaches. I can't make these things happen throughout the system that need to happen in order for the young prospects and players, when they get to us at the big league level, to be ready. And it's just been pretty clear that a lot of those young guys have not gotten the level of guidance and coaching and niche coaching as well on their way up through the system to where they get to the big leagues and they know what to do. It's situational stuff. It's fundamental stuff. It's the kind of stuff that you can be on top of as the manager of the big league club. But if you're being, all these pieces are changing throughout the season, and you've got to know that all of these guys have had that same sort of background. The Cardinal way has clearly kind of been lost. And look, you might point to that and say, well, maybe this was the stuff that Mike Shildt was upset about 2 years ago when John Mozeliak fired him for it. That's a John Mozeliak problem, though. That's not an Ollie Marmol problem to be the person that takes Mike Shilt's spot as the next man up. That Mike Shildt, if those were the points he was making to the front office, well, probably had a point, right? But we don't know exactly what went on in those rooms and those conversations as those decisions were being made. But if you're Ollie Marmol, you're on the other side of that, looking to lead the team forward. But you can still recognize some of the same things that, again, I talked with Josh Jacobs about it in the episode of Philosophical Differences that we did. Complacency. It would be the number one word that I would use to describe John Mozeliak's tenure over the past few years, where just kind of felt like, well, we've always been able to do things this way, and it's worked for us, and so we'll continue to do it that way, and that's what works. But they got behind. They got behind in some of these areas, and that's why Chaim Bloom was here auditing all year long to figure out, hey, where do we need to beef up and go from here? And hopefully those changes are going to be made now with the buy-in from ownership as well, because one of the key things that I want to make sure to point out from Katie's article, almost in defense of Mo, is that if Mo is operating with a set budget and he has to make decisions on whether to allocate those resources toward infrastructure in the minors and coaching and the things that you need down there for development purposes, and splitting that between, hey, we are short 2 big league starters, and if we don't get them, we're not going to be a playoff team this year or even have a real crack at it, then you're maybe going to prioritize that big league payroll, especially if you are John Mozeliak and you know that 2025 is your last year before you've basically said, I'm going to depart the organization and my current role at that point. So you can understand why, as Mo, you might want to allocate the resources thusly. And I think the problem boils down to, if that was the case, as it was reported on by Katie, Bill DeWitt, I mean, he's got to own this. He could have, for a fraction of a Lance Lynn season, figured out ways to beef up the infrastructure of the minors and had these coaches that are focusing on base running and roving throughout the system, that are focusing on infield, that are focusing on outfield, rather than just basically saying, well, a secret weapon's pretty good. Jose Oquendo, he can handle all that, right? He can kind of oversee all that. You got to have the personnel and you got to have the talent and the coaches, and just it's a numbers game at a certain point. It was kind of jarring to see the way that it was broken down by Katie, where you talk about the Phillies and the Brewers and all these other teams that have 14 to 17, full-time coaching roles that are allocated thusly across the organization. The Cardinals have 5. It's not very difficult to see why the Cardinals have fallen behind. That is simple. What are those coaches? I mean, I don't know what their salaries are. $100,000, $200,000, $350,000, whatever it is. You're talking about a fraction of a Lance Lynn season to fix those issues, as long as you're able to identify and hire the right personnel and coaches to fill those roles. That's not automatic either. You can't just throw money at it if you don't have the right people. And you got to identify those people, and you have to get them to buy into what you're trying to do as an organization. And it just feels like the Cardinals have gotten complacent in those areas. So that's kind of a side spiel to really what I wanted to dig in on. That's setting the scene for why this Sonny Gray conversation is a conversation in the first place. And this was also mentioned in Katie's article, and stands to reason. We kind of figured this would be the case. If the Cardinals are talking about reducing payroll, they're going to have some heart-to-hearts with 3 guys. And it's not more than 3, in my opinion. It's the 3 that we talked about. It's Contreras, it's Arenado, and it's Sonny Gray, because they're making the most money, and they're the ones that you actually want to still be here. You might say, well, Miles Mikolas is a high-paid veteran. You could pay Miles Mikolas his money, shake his hand, and tell him it's been real for 2025, and I wouldn't really have an issue with that, right? I think you could. Now, granted, you might say we're going to come up against an innings crisis where that's how the bottom really falls out, and if you're paying Michaelis anyway, might as well have him be one of your 5 starters if you're not able to trade that contract without eating basically 90% of it. And I think it's going to be difficult to do that. I mean, maybe there's a team that would go, yeah, would take a Miles Michaelis on a $2-3 million for the season if the Cardinals are paying 85% of his deal, what 18, 17 million, whatever it is. So, like, maybe that's a route that they would pursue. You could also shake his hand and say it's been real and pay him his money, but say we're not allocating 30 starts to you next year because we want to find out about some of our internal guys that we might have interest in being part of our team in 2026 if they prove their mettle. Granted, if you look at the Memphis rotation this year, a lot of those guys spent a lot of the season injured. Kloffenstein, injured. Robertson had some injuries. Liberatore, obviously, was up here with the big club and was really relegated to bullpen. Zach Thompson spent a lot of time injured. So unless you beef up the system where you have those guys waiting to take those major league starts, maybe having a Michaelis around or even saying, if we can't trade Steven Matz and he can give us 20 starts, we'll let him do it because we're paying him anyway. Like, those are some of the things that are going to have to be considered as well. But Gray is one of those guys that you want because you could envision him being part of a 2026 where maybe it will just be a 1-year step back and then they can identify what they still need and then they can get the payroll levels back up if the Bally Sports Midwest stuff is all resolved. Maybe it's a multi-year situation that they aren't quite ready by 2026 to reinvest in the team and be top 10 in payroll as they really arguably need to be given the fan support that they've had over the recent years. So those are the things that are going to have to be laid out with Sonny Gray and with Arenado and with Wilson Contreras, guys who have at least 2 more years left at high cost. And do you want to be a part of this or not? And if the answer is no, I don't see how the Cardinals would try to hold them hostage. I think you'd be willing to trade those players based on the kind of rumblings that we saw. What was it? Well, not this year, but last July when the Cardinals were so bad. It was the Dodgers, Arenado. It was all coming from the Dodgers side. And you could make the connection. Okay, was Arenado's agent kind of trying to make that happen? Was Arenado unhappy? Was he certainly never going to say anything publicly if that was the case? We still don't really know exactly where that came from. It was all coming from the Dodgers side. But with all that smoke, sometimes there's eventually a fire burning underneath. And you also know that Arenado he wants to win. I mean, he's always been very clear about wanting to win. And he was told that when you come here to St. Louis, when we make this trade for you from the Rockies, this is the way that it's going to go down. And we're going to get you where you want to be in the MLB postseason in the World Series. Hasn't happened, so I couldn't even fault Arenado to say, look, yeah, partially Arenado's fault because he was the highest paid player on a team that underperformed. So if he had been up to his standards, that would have brought the Cardinals all the more closer to being able to get that job done. But also, could you see a world in which, Arenado could kind of, really any of these guys could be the Kevin Durant, right? And you say, yeah, if you can't beat him, join him. And Arenado could be the 5th most prominent player on a Los Angeles Dodgers team that goes out and wins, and there's a little bit of pressure off his back because he doesn't have to be the guy and joins a super team and probably gets a ring out of it. If I'm Arenado, that would be – I'm not saying I wouldn't be very intrigued by that idea too, especially given the way the last couple of years have gone in St. Louis. But also Arenado, I think, really kind of showed some very interesting aspects of his personality and the way he sees things in a leadership role, where recently he said, no, I don't want to be the guy that's a clubhouse cancer in here. I want to feed into the younger guys. So does that kind of take root, that mindset and mentality, and he becomes somebody that wants to be the leader that sticks around for the long haul and decides, no, I don't want to be traded. I wanted to come here. I see that maybe it's going to be a little bit of a different path than we thought, but I think 2025, we're going to invest in some of these young guys. I'm going to lead them. Wilson's going to lead them. Sonny's going to lead them. Maybe you bring back a Kyle Gibson to kind of be the mentor in the rotation if you don't have Michaelis, whatever the case might be, and you kind of go from there, but you say it's going to be a group of players that has talent. We try to find a way to win. Like, maybe that's Arenado's mindset. I don't know. Wilson Contreras, we know, has made the comments already about 1 through 9. There are holes in the lineup, and there's going to have to be some moves. You'd have to ask the front office about that. So Wilson, I think, behind closed doors is going to have that chance to press the eject button if he wants to. I think it would be the only fair thing for the Cardinals to do. Granted, I don't know, money. There's a lot of money for Arenado that's owed. Good chunk of money still for Wilson, obviously, that's owed. And then Sonny is a little bit of a different situation because they just signed him. He's only been here for the 1 year, and there's only 2 years left, but the contract was backloaded. So part of that's like, did the Cardinals backload it knowing that, they were going to be on the hook for that first year, but after that, they might be able to trade him? Well, it's obviously more difficult to trade a player with a backloaded heavy contract, but at the same time, if the Cardinals aren't concerned about the return, and they just would tell a team like, yeah, we'll even eat a little bit of the money, and you can just have him so we don't have to pay him. Like, all right, that would be disconcerting for the present day situation the Cardinals are going into in 2025. But that could be where they are. Maybe Sonny Gray says, no, man, I don't want to go anywhere else. This is where I wanted to be, and I got 2 years on my contract for a reason, and we're gonna win this year, and we're gonna win the next year. Like, doesn't matter what the payroll is. We're gonna go out there and get it done. These all are individuals that are gonna, I think, get the opportunity to kind of make those decisions. But the fact that Bob Nightengale is reporting this before the season's even over tells me that, and think what you will about Bob Nightengale, he's definitely connected. But it's reported by Bob that, okay, the Cincinnati Reds are going to be pushing for it. So has Bob heard from the Reds side of things that, yeah, I mean, we're talking pitching with the Cardinals, and that's a name that came up already. Who knows the way that kind of report comes to fruition? Only Bob does. But it is interesting that this year's not even over yet, that the body's not even cold, and we're already talking about tearing down the rotation and the guy that was the anchor of it. And look, Sonny didn't quite have as good of a year as I'm sure he wanted to have, and as Cardinals fans wanted him to have. What was the ERA, like 3.8? Also dealing with that injury that put him on I don't even think we did a podcast about it, because it was like, okay, you've got tendonitis, whatever, forearm flexor, whatever. Like that flexor stuff is concerning, because it can obviously turn into an elbow thing and a Tommy John thing, but also your arm's always going to be a little bit sore, right? Your pitcher. So that was kind of, to me, the way they were going to shut him down. I would not be injury-wise concerned about that for Sonny Gray, but I'll be very interested to see whether this has legs or not. And if you are going that route, then you might as well do the whole thing, right? You might as well send Arenado and save a little bit of money that way. Maybe you get a prospect or two back for these guys. Contreras, I don't know, man. I think Contreras is in an interesting spot, because honestly, Cardinals probably would have never. I think he's been very good for the team, for the clubhouse. Offensively, he's been great. He improved so much as a catcher between last offseason and this one. But what I would say is, if it weren't for Ivan Herrera having that just miserable 2022 where he didn't take a step forward and he didn't quite have a grasp of what would be asked of him to become a big leaguer and to kind of take the place of Yachty when the time came, if he didn't have such a bad summer, I don't think they ever would have gone after Wilson Contreras in free agency and spent that money, because they would have had Herrera and probably Andrew Kisner to kind of see through that next season. And then other guys that we've since seen come up, guys like Pages, Jimmy Crooks is on the way. That could have been the situation. Herrera is a big league hitter. If he can make the strides defensively that we saw Wilson Contreras make over an offseason, if that could be this coming winter for Herrera is somebody that you want to be in your lineup and can be one of the most productive bats from the catching position in the league. So, like, what do the Cardinals want to do with that? Do they want to have Contreras play some more first base? Do they want to try that outfield thing again that was floated at the beginning of last year, which we all thought was kind of ridiculous? But they have some decisions to make about how they want to move forward, because clearly they like Pages too. And I like Pages. I don't think Pages is the hitter Herrera is. I think he's a better defender at this point. But could you also see a world in which, if Contreras said, man, if they're trading everybody else, I could understand if they want to trade me, even though I don't think Wilson's the kind of, again, I wouldn't look down on anybody that wanted to get out, but I also don't think Wilson's going to be making excuses or, asking for an out necessarily. I just think I think he would roll with the punches. But at the same time, if you were really trying to say 2025, we're just trying to find the foundation of what this team's going to be, and that might mean playing Pages for 80 games, and it might mean playing Herrera for 80 games behind the plate, and really figuring it out, what you have in those guys, and allowing them to develop with the young, starting rotation, that maybe a McGreevy gets 30 starts and he's part of your future because he does well. Maybe he does terribly and you go, okay, he can't be part of your future, but at least we know now. Like, if that's the vibe of next season, there's a lot of things that I think would be dominoes falling behind a Sonny Gray trade that could include an Arenado trade, could include a Wilson Contreras trade. Ryan Helsley shouldn't be on this team next year if those three aren't, right? And even then, maybe you could make the case that Ryan Helsley shouldn't be on this team next year because his value is never going to be higher than it is right now, except for in July when it arguably was. But even at the time, I said, look, the Cardinals have committed to trying to make this thing happen. They want to make a run. I wouldn't trade Helsley now. They haven't been the foresight organization. They haven't been the organization that was going to be willing to take that immediate PR hit to say, yeah, we're trading Helsley because we don't believe in what we have. No, I think at the time they thought, yeah, we can make the playoffs and all of this can go swimmingly the way that it's supposed to. But now that it hasn't, and Helsley's got 1 year left and he's going to get a huge raise in ARB because he's earned it, you have to trade him. from a business standpoint, you have to trade him. He can't be on this team unless you as ownership are going to continue fielding a top 12 payroll, continue to try to make it work and give Cardinals fans the winner that they deserve. If you have to take a step back from that because you're going to spend the year kind of focusing on cleaning up internal issues and fixing the development of the organization, which again, I think could happen at the same time as still prioritizing the payroll, but I'm living in reality where I know the seeds that are being sown, and they're not going to do it. They're not going to try to max out the payroll again while also just infusing more cash into the infrastructure of the organization at the same time that there's a decline in attendance, at the same time that there's a TV contract issue going around. So that's just the world in which I think we live when it comes to the 2025 Cardinals. If that's the case, though, and it goes as far as to trade Sonny Gray, which maybe only happens because Sonny Gray asks for it to, or maybe it's the Cardinals going, yeah, we backloaded this for a reason because we knew we might have to eat a little bit of the money, but we're gonna trade him, and prospects that come back don't really matter. You could have front loaded it, right, and then he would have been easier to trade, but then he would have also been easier to keep. I think the Cardinals I see both sides of that where people say, oh my gosh, by backloading the contract, it's an admission that this thing has gone completely off the rails compared to what they expected. I really don't agree with that. I think they minimized what they had to pay him this year because they knew even if it's a tough contract to trade, he's having a good season. We can trade him as long as we don't demand very much back in the way of prospect capital. To me, it almost does leave them that out, that they did backload it, but I could see both sides of that argument that it makes him tougher to trade because there is so much money attached. We'll see what happens. I don't know what's going to happen with Sonny Gray, but I did not expect necessarily to get a report from a national insider already that, hey, Cardinals are expected to shop him. And if they're shopping him, and I'm Arenado looking at that, I'm like, well, what am I doing here? And if I'm Wilson Contreras, and that's not to say anything about those guys and their personalities or that they're not good team players or anything like that. That's just the business of it. What am I doing here spending my mid-30s with a team that is trading away other players that are like me, that are, star names, being paid a lot? What would I still have to offer an organization like that? Could very much be an argument that I could see from any of those guys if any one of the other three are ultimately dealt. So will they trade Sonny Gray? I don't know, but it's already being talked about. Let me know how that makes you feel, Cardinals fans, and are you bracing for whatever news may come Monday? I think it could be definitely an interesting day in the Cardinals organization with a lot of interesting days and weeks and months to come thereafter. So let me know in the comments what you think about the report from Bob Nightengale that the Cardinals are expected to shop Sonny Gray this offseason after just 1 year with the Cardinals. A lot of money remaining on the contract for the next 2 seasons. Make sure you guys hit that subscribe button. We are going to be hot and heavy with Cardinals content all off season long. I know that September has not been very productive when it comes to the YouTube channel and the B-Schaeff Daily Podcast, but you guys saw the same thing I saw from the Cardinals, and I wasn't going to do it. I wasn't going to go into the minutia every day of recapping games that nobody was watching, that nobody cared about anymore, so that 200 people could listen to it. I feel like this is going to reignite interest in the Cardinals, the fact that we're finally moving forward and seeing what they're going to do in the future. So my point is daily content is returning. Make sure you guys are along for the ride. Appreciate you guys as always, and we'll talk to you next time on B-Schaeff Daily. Peace.